So here's another way to put the question. Should we just shut the fuck up about calling it Web3? Like, seriously, is this just like a branding problem?
I mean, the Reddit avatars situation officially confirms that this whole thing is a marketing issue.
Welcome to Games Growth with Upptic, a podcast about the discipline of scaling digital games. We speak with industry experts and investigate trends to highlight the strategies, technology, and tactical methodologies to profitably grow your game to massive global audiences. We've got a little bit of an interesting and different podcast for you guys today. We're speaking with a few of the folks internally who have been our leads on their Web3 games growth initiatives here. And we go through a sort of whirlwind expedition through the history of Web3 gaming, what's worked, what hasn't, what are the ups, what are the downs, and where we are now. How do you think it went, Warren?
I feel cleansed. I feel like we just went through a group therapy session.
Yeah.
Because I think, there's so many, for Web3, it feels like there's two types of discussions online. It's either the unrealistic, unrelenting optimism, which I think history has proven, at least for this first era of games, has been ill-founded or impractical, or it's the unadulterated hatred. NFTs are going to zero, Web3 is going to zero. F this stuff. We want nothing to do with it in the game industry. And I felt like we had a really good conversation about the ups and downs that we've all gone through as participants in the space, both working on it, for our business as Upptic, but also in playing these games, being part of these communities, witnessing the trends, the good and the bad. So I really liked it because it felt like one of the most level-headed discussions about, where things have been, where they're going. And it's good to get the team's perspectives of, folks that have been in the trenches in different ways.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think, we have some really interesting and sort of actionable takeaways at the end. So listen to the end to get those things. But I think, slight spoiler alert, I think we feel cautiously optimistic for the future. And, none of us are super bullish. There's not a thing scaling to 100 million users tomorrow. There's likely a path here for folks who are still interested in the space.
Yeah. I left it feeling like the first truly massive Web3 game is probably either currently in development or in soft launch right now. I don't think it's something that's live on the market, but I think we've settled to a really good space that can facilitate the building of that game, finally, after a lot of fits and starts and broken parts of the ecosystem that provided these initial setbacks.
Agreed. All right, cool. Check out the episode.
As always, thanks for checking out the podcast today. Is brought to you by our team here at Upptic. Here at Upptic, we do things to help games grow, games of all shapes, sizes, and technologies. We really pride ourselves on catering to just great games across how they're built and across who they're made for. So in our portfolio of games we support, we have awesome mobile games, PC games, Web3 games, and just about every cross-section of these. And we just pride ourselves on being gamers first and foremost, marketers second, and understanding the deep nuance of each game and how you scale it to the appropriate audience, both with the workforce and the technology to do that. So if you're making a rad game and need some help scaling that to the right audience, reach out to us through our website. It's upptic.com, upptic.com.
Welcome, everyone. Excited to be here. We'll start by just doing some intros. My name is Xander, Agosta, Director of Marketing. We have a really cool panel for us today, and so we're just going to go around that really quickly. First, we have Warren, our co-founder and CGO here at Upptic. Say hi, Warren.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Looking forward to this today.
You guys should probably know him if you've heard the podcast before. Next up, we have Ian, our Senior Growth Manager for Web3. Hey, Ian.
Hello, friends.
And lastly, we have Sherif, aka Chronicle, one of our Web3 growth leads.
Hi, everyone.
Cool. So for context, what we'll be doing here is a little bit different. We have an internal group here of Upptic folks. We want to give a little bit of context for where Web3 is today and what is sort of the path that's gotten us here. And so we'll be talking about everything about Web3 and is the dream dead? What do you think, guys? Is it dead?
Not yet.
It's got a flesh wound for sure.
So I think we'll start with sort of like the history, and then we'll talk through what's going on now and then what we see for the future. Who wants to start? Who do you think here has the best context for talking about the history of Web3?
Maybe it'd be interesting to just talk about how each of us came in and discovered Web3 gaming. And that was kind of, I think, a unifying thing that brought at least the three of us, myself, Ian, and Sharif, I think, as common bond, like early in our conversations that led to both of them joining Upptic in different capacities. So,
hey, Warren,
I know
before you did.
Yes, that's true. That's true. I know, Ian, do you want to start a little bit with like how you came into Web3 gaming and what caught your attention about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was working at Vungle, in-app SDK ad network for a long time, and that's the first time that Warren and my paths crossed. But then fast forward to 2021, I had heard from a friend that like, hey, you can actually make money playing a game. I was like, okay, I'll believe it when I see it. But then I started researching Axi Infinity, and it was really sort of mind-blowing to me in the sense that, you know, you own these Axi NFTs, and then in order to make a new Axi, you have to read them together, which executes the smart contract. So both the technical underpinnings and the real world impacts of like, oh, wow, so this is a game economy that people have to own the things in order to make more of the things, and then they can sell them to each other. Absolutely blew my mind. So in my interview at Upptic with Warren, he asked me, what game am I playing right now? And I was just ranting about Axi Infinity being the future of gaming and how this whole notion of ownership and a peer-to-peer economy was the future. So yeah, I mean, that's definitely how I got acquainted with Web3. I mean, I'd been trading cryptocurrencies not successfully for a while before then, but yeah, that was the first NFTs and real world application.
And Ian, just some context, what year is that?
It's been 2 years, 2021.
The number was still up at that time.
Yes.
Number go up at that time.
Cool. So fairly recent into the space. How about you, Sherif? Do you want to talk about what brought you in and sort of what the timeline was?
I mean, to be fair, Xander, I think, 2 years in Web3 is like a decade in traditional gaming.
Everyone keeps telling themselves.
It's a different time scale for sure. Yeah, no, I've been in crypto and NFTs initially since 2017. I always share the story. The first introduction to crypto was buying a token called BitShares before it became Neo, which was basically before the basis of Binance. So I got, early days, and just like Ian, traded unsuccessfully at the time. So don't let the year that I joined make any assumptions of where I'm at in life. Then, following the progression of just that space was really fascinating to me. I naturally was a gamer, just since I was a kid, really invested in Web2 traditional gaming, followed a lot of influencers on YouTube, and came across Alex Becker and Elliot Wainman, also known as Elliot Trades, spoke about Web3 gaming. And this is the major advancement in the space that's coming. Got really invested in it. They started what is now called Neo Tokyo, which is an NFT community that's focused on Web3 gaming in the metaverse space. They created it using a gamified process, which is what also fascinated me. I was lucky enough to get in with the first 2,000 people, slowly built up an outreach team in that process, and now I function as one of the leads of the community, just have it network across Web3. Through that community, I actually became acquainted with Warren, and we chatted about Upptic and the work that's being done specifically in the Web3 gaming clients. And so I became fascinated and really wanted to help push that space forward. So I ended up joining. I think it's been over a year at this point.
It's crazy. Time flies.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think some people have heard my entry, but I'll give like the short version. I also came in similar to Ian, like through the Axi boom period. I've always been a big contrarian though. So I did not want to play Axi initially. I was like, I got to find something else. It's undiscovered, which led me to being rugged by many scammy early stage like Web3 gaming projects, and losing money is a good way to learn things. That's how I learned like performance marketing in general, is like losing my own money doing it, and a good way to learn a lot about Web3. But to me, like gaming was the first thing that was actually compelling and intuitive about anything in crypto. I didn't care much about like kind of traditional crypto stuff, but I was, since a little kid, I was like a Magic the Gathering player, and that concept of like owning the game pieces and them existing outside of the gameplay itself and being able to trade them and use them in different ways of combining, that was like very intuitive. And so Web3 to me just jumped out as like the most logical digital evolution of that kind of economic layer for a game, which was like really, really fascinating. How about you, Xander?
Yeah, I mean,
what's your journey been like?
The thing about first bought crypto in 2018, 2019, never made a lot of money, never did a lot of trading. But then I heard about this thing called Axi around the same time as the rest of you, and I went to give it a try. I mean, my lens has always been obsession with game design. And so whenever someone's like, hey, there's a whole new game design economy concept, it's like, all right, let me see how it works. I like crashed pretty hard into the wall. I mean, I spent 4 figures to set up a team of 3 Axis, which promptly lost 50% of their value before I sold out. And the thing about Axi initially is I thought it was a really cool game, but you hit the wall, which was if I want 2 in my deck, you're in for another $500 to switch out a card. And so that was like sort of like my initial was like, this is really cool. This is really interesting. I see the legs here. There's a lot of ways that this can be extended, but the mechanisms of it early on just aren't working. And since then, I've been watching the space closely. At Upptic, we've been talking to tons of games. I think I'm probably the most skeptical of the 3-4 folks here. Not to say that I don't think there is a path forward for Web3 games, but I'm always like user experience first, game design first, and we're still ways away from many of the projects, which, I think we're starting to see it change, but not there yet.
Yeah, I mean, it's got a lot of problems. Most of us on here are advocates for the technology and gaming, but like, we'll be real about it. Like, there's a lot of problems with the space today. I think we'll dig into them. And one thing I want to call out, because I think all of us mentioned Axi in some capacity, or at least 3 of us did, is like, it's easy to call out. Axi are our friends, and they've been our clients at this point, and it's easy to call out the things that they got wrong or were suboptimal. But it's also a factor of like coming first. So I think that's a lot of what we can unpack today is like, what was this first big boom period of Web3 gaming like? What did we get right? What did we get wrong? And what have we learned? And what do we think this next era is going to look like?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, I hesitate to call it a bubble, but I mean, I think it's pretty fair to say that's what it is. Like, what happened over the past couple of years when we pivoted really hard to Upptic to be like, this is a core tenet of our business. There was a ton of VC capital. We did a chart. It was, I should pull this up. Billions of dollars last year that went into Web3 specific gaming investments. And it was like a crazy chart that just goes up and to the right. So what happened during this period?
It's a good question. It's like a confluence of factors, right? We had money printing in general. I think along,
right?
I think along with stagnation in the game industry and kind of like a whiff of something new that could be changing for the industry. So I feel like that's sort of the things that I saw that added up to this bubbly period. But I don't know, guys, how did we get to that crazy market of like 2021?
Well, what folks may not know?
Yeah, so it was a mix of factors, really. I mean, you had the boom of Bitcoin and Ethereum really ramping up with Tesla investment and just all of this mainstream news leading up to crypto. And then the NFT boom coming shortly after that with BAYC, and then, those staggering numbers. So there was just a lot of eyes on the space. And because of that, money follows those eyes. And so you had Animoca really built up their investments, and other big VCs really dedicate the time and just build that portfolio. FTX, RIP, really invested a lot in that space too, which, inadvertently affected a lot of those projects, which we can get to. But because of that, that promise was there. And honestly, it's not something that the concept wasn't foreign to a lot of people, because you have games like CSGO and others where you have this concept of a secondary market for things in the game. So it wasn't a foreign concept. It was just the idea of, rather than having this centralized to one group, it's decentralized and allows multiple people to participate. Yeah. It was just the execution that really faltered.
Right. Yeah. And then following this, I think that's a good kind of list of the main factors. I think it's worth talking through like what happened then. It's like we had sort of the blow up of these Web3 native things like Bored Ape Yacht Club, like Axi, and the money started funneling in. And then we also saw this like long tail effect of almost every traditional gaming company started announcing a Web3 division ahead of Web3, new initiatives around this, titles in development. And that's sort of like when we're at the peak, right? I don't know, Ian, do you have any other observations or thoughts from sort of like this peak era that we're not considering yet?
No, that sounds spot on.
So what went wrong?
Well, I think the games, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you said something interesting a second ago. It's like the concept wasn't different. EVE Online, Second Life, even World of Warcraft secondary market. There have been the concept of marketplaces that are player-owned assets that resell the secondary market forever, for as long as gaming. And I think the interesting thing is now we have a technology which deems itself native to be able to facilitate that. And so the thing that makes a ton of sense then is like everyone jumps on the bandwagon, because if you as a game can become a platform and take a transaction fee, it's like the best business model of all time. And so Ian, you're about to say something about what you think happened in this period.
No, I think what you're saying is valid. But I mean, from my perspective, it's a trade-off between, is it a real value proposition or is it like technology fluff? So I think, what Warren was referring to is a real value proposition, right? It's player-owned assets that they can trade in an open economy. That's a real value proposition. I think at that peak, all of the hype basically made it so if you're coming up with a slight spin on that idea and, you had a great roadmap for the next 2 years of all the things that you're going to do, that was enough to get people to just throw money your way. And so what went wrong? I mean, a million things, but particularly the projects not delivering like actually fun, enjoyable games. And then people are like, okay, wait, so we're dumping money into a thing that is just a idea. It's not an actual playable fun thing yet. And so then along with the crypto markets crashing and, FTX debacle and everything else, money just went the polar opposite direction. And, to Warren's point, where all of the traditional Web2 studios announced that they had a new Web3 division or director of Web3, so many of those plans immediately got canceled, which was interesting thing to watch.
Yeah, it's the sequencing of priorities, right? So, a lot of the entrants into the space looked at the transactional benefit and they prioritized that mechanic in the game over the actual game loop that would interest players into the game. I always think, anytime I have this conversation, I always think of Gary Vee's article about, he said 97% of NFT communities are going to fail. And he went on this rant of why. And one of the main reasons is poor operators. And what this is really defined as is that you have people that didn't have that experience in Web2 traditional gaming, but came into the Web3 space and promised gaming products as a part of their venture. And, went into that creating it and not understanding like the fundamental mechanics of an interesting game loop that attracts players to keep them coming back, and then layering on top the Web3 portion. I think that's coming. I'm very optimistic about the future, especially if you look at, recent patents by Sony and others that are really focused on the space. You have this first wave of experimentation, and then we're going to have a second wave of real players really focused in testing the mechanics and then bringing it to fruition.
Yeah, Warren, I think maybe something that you can give us some insight on is like, there were growth tactics that worked during this period. Do you want to just briefly sort of touch on what are some of the tactics we developed during this period that helped us pump up these NFT projects that were
and
in the future?
To be clear, when we say us, we mean kind of the space in general, not necessarily like...
Well, I mean, we had growth tactics that worked too that we deployed.
That's true. I mean, you could do anything. Like the fervor was so high at this time, and I was guilty of it too. It's just sort of like you're part of a community and someone's just like, hey, there's a new game. Someone posts about it and it has 10,000 followers on Twitter shortly thereafter, as opposed to a market now where projects are like, how do we even get anyone to look at us or take us seriously? And maybe to start on this, actually, Sherif, this is kind of how we met. You worked a lot in some of these areas that provided growth for these projects, and you can elaborate on, during this bull run, the tactics that you saw kind of in the trenches working the most.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah. I mean, in the bull run, it was just the number of people participating in the space aided in the growth of projects. And so by having basically a network of communities that are focused on Web3 in general, so not just gaming, but just focused on Web3 projects that are bringing something new and fresh to the table. And so you would leverage relationships between those communities. You have then holders crossing to this new project, and that helped build it up. And because there was this just like fervor, like Warren was saying, of like, what's the new next thing that we really need to jump on? And just people were like really ready to FOMO in, essentially. It helped grow projects. Nowadays, you have this just a smaller population. And if you look at like the Venn diagram of gamers and Web3 native participants and that overlap, it's like much smaller than what it used to be. But those are, diehards that are really focused on the space. And so you'd still want to leverage those relationships for the early growth of projects, because those are the ones that really believe in the technology and its prospects.
Yeah, and Ian, maybe we can go to you here. I think Sherif is painting a good picture of the time. You heading up our early Web3 games here at Upptic, maybe talk a little bit about the KPIs projects are aiming for, some of our R&D work to like productize parts of this and kind of bring some order from chaos, for better or worse? Like, how did we take what we saw in the space and then try to apply it to some of the projects that we're supporting at that time?
Sure. So yeah, the main KPI outside of, if someone was running a mint, always the KPI was selling out the mint. But other than that, the metric that mattered was your Discord server size. And then secondarily, but very correlated, is your Twitter following. Twitter and Discord being the two channels that Web3 natives are using all the time. And yeah, it's interesting. Twitter is actually worse than Discord, but Discord is amazingly bad at providing detailed analytics of any sort, especially as it pertains to attributing users from where they came from to activities within your server. There's literally nothing built out for that. So, of course, there are ways to work around that. Our prototype V1, or is V0 really, of being able to track Discord analytics in terms of our efforts was leveraging a bunch of third-party bots. Basically, think of those as plugins that you can put on Discord servers. And through daisy chaining a number of them together, we were able to generate unique invite codes, see how many people joined via those invite codes, push that data to a Google Sheets, and then actually have detailed reporting in terms of what communities are actually resulting in joins. So that was the technical underpinning to the work that Sherif was doing on the front lines in terms of actually reaching out to these other partners, figuring out what incentives they needed in order to agree to this partnership. And yeah, during the bull run, you barely needed to give away anything for people to be interested in cross-promote.
And maybe just to chime in to summarize kind of the two halves of what you guys are talking about for people that this might sound like totally foreign to if you're not as into Web3. So like this tactic is essentially like, you can think of it as cross-promotion with other Web3 communities where we're trying to get them to join the Discord and check out the project we represent. So as marketers that are data-driven, we're trying to quantify this stuff. So yeah, how can we track who came in from which of these partnerships, quantify that, measure the efficacy of each of these, but work around all of Discord and Twitter's like janky limitations. So that's really the problem we're trying to solve at this point.
So yeah, I think, Dave, did you have something you want to add?
No. I mean, I think, yeah, that put a nice bow on it. That was really, for the first, 6 months of when we were doing this work, it was connecting those pipes and testing everything out. That gave us the basis to actually offer, Discord analytics as a part of the Upptic platform. We productized all of those efforts. But yeah, I mean, and I'm probably jumping the gun here, but it has been very interesting to see that this sort of bread and butter foundation of the Web3 growth strategy that we had put in place is now much less effective and available than it was previously. So,
Well, yeah, that's a good segue. Like, so let's talk about that. What's changed high level in macroeconomics, and then how is that flooded through?
Well, I think the most important thing to call out is there's just a lot less people.
Yeah.
95% of those people, depending on the metric you're looking at.
Right. What's happened that caused that?
I mean, I'd say because a lot of them were not native to the space prior and joined in with the promise of, most of them, speculation on financial gain. And just that downturn and seeing things, if you see a portfolio drop more than 80% in like half a day, you're going to get scared and probably, I'm never going to come back to this space. And so unfortunately, that's what tended to happen to a lot of participants. If you look at, there's some Dune charts that look at some of the growth of number of wallets that connected to OpenSea as an example during the bull run. And then I think like more than 95% of them were just inactive since that time. Yeah. And that's primary reason.
Yeah, and I think in passing, we touched on two other kind of related factors. One is just like this idea of empty promises. For me, like the peak was probably a project called Pixelmon that some people may have heard of, where it was an NFT mint that it was, it's a Pokemon style game that was promised, and they ended up using like footage from like footage libraries or like asset libraries, and there was no game. I think the founder was like 19 years old or something, and had no game development experience. Yeah, and they raised like $70 million on an NFT sale, and then people realized, oh, there's kind of nothing here, and that kind of ties to that point of like bad operators. Like even if there's no ill intent there, I think there's two sides of the coin. One is just sort of like incompetence, and the other is like explicit ill actors, like both of which just giving a horrible reputation to the space.
And I think the undercurrent that like underpins this change in behavior is really basically the U.S. Fed's funds rate, right? That's the thing that I think was implied but unsaid, was like, this is all seemed to be like zero interest rate phenomenon, right? And so as you had
COVID's going on.
That's another really good
We've got
thing.
free checks that are showing up in our houses. We're stuck at our houses. There's an awesome new thing going on.
Yeah.
As those pieces start to unwind, COVID unwinds, the stimmy checks, which I think are overblown, but people say the stimmy checks are what's driving this. But I think the thing that's, really driving this is when there's 13-year bull run on big investment firms and having what they assume to be free money. And as that becomes unwound, that flows down to the system and hits the speculative assets at the far end at the hardest. And this is the speculative of speculative of speculative assets. And so that, I think, is the thing that sort of sucked all the excess users out of the system. And what's left is a very, very small core group of really dedicated players and even more dedicated developers.
Yeah.
We wanted to talk about how and where we got to now.
I think there's a few other kind of meta things that are worth touching on. So this was kind of the era of two intertwined things that I think are important to touch on before moving on to the current state, which is digging a little bit more into the funding and what was broken about that. I think that's another big theme. And then also, I think touching on the play to earn thesis and what didn't work out about play to earn 1.0. So maybe I'll start on the VC thing, and then maybe Ian, you can speak a little bit about play to earn. But I think, especially with hindsight, there was a huge problem with the funding mechanism for most of these games. We learned as we started working with more teams that there is a ton of pressure. Oh, let me back up a step. So far to date, almost every Web3 game has had a token as part of its economy, a token that's on chain that you can buy, sell, trade, and that's also used as a fundraising device. For anyone listening to this, there's no reason that a game using Web3 tech has to have a token, other than these games were not getting funded unless they put tokens in them. So what we saw is this toxic combination of tokens being shoehorned into game economies where they weren't originally designed for that in order to get funded, and the VCs demanding this so they had quick and easy exit liquidity. Mm-hmm. And the byproduct of this, which we'll maybe go into the play to earn discussion, is we have essentially a 0% success rate for any gaming-based token in this era to date. Not to say that there couldn't be, but almost without fail, 95% or more of the value of all these tokens is gone. Yeah, I think that's one of the big reasons why play to earn as the thesis didn't pan out. But I'm curious, Ian, do you have any thoughts on what else were the flaws with play to earn 1.0 as we saw it?
Yeah, let me start by confirming that I am not an economist, so it's hard to speak to the details with certainty here, but based on reading a bunch of stuff and general observations, and again, don't want to be beating a dead horse here, but in terms of Axi being the prototypical example of play to earn economy, taking me as an example, I know why I joined Axi. It was speculative, right? I was like, I want to figure out if I can buy these Axis and then breed them and make money. And based on my timing, I could. But I think there was a huge majority of people that were in that ecosystem that were either speculative for their ability to buy Axis and sell them for profit or breed them for profit. And then there was a huge contingent of people that were in there that were doing the play to earn thing.
Right.
The thing about play to earn is, it's sort of twofold. Prong one is the coin that you are earning needs to retain value, or else it doesn't matter how much of that coin you earn, it's going to still be worth nothing. So Smooth Love Potion is the primary coin that you would earn by playing the game on a day-to-day basis. And yeah, once the bull run ended, the actual SLP value, I think, went down 10x or more within, a month. And I need to double check the exact numbers and timeline on that, but the order of magnitude is approximately correct. So then that gives these people that are still earning the same amount of in-game currency, it's just not worth anything anymore. And then the second prong of that is the ability to pay anything out in terms of real monetary value is dependent on people continuing to put real monetary value into the system. So basically, you had all these speculators that were coming in, they maintained a floor price on the Axi marketplace. And that sort of artificially inflated how much everything was worth. And then that came down. And basically, it was not a rug pull, but it was a scenario in which, like, basically, if you got in too late, all of the value of the whole system went way down, and there was no opportunity to exit for what you put in or for a profit, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, by no definition is Axi a rug pull. They're still improving the game, launching new products. I think still one of the better examples. But at the end of the day, the economy collapsed, because what you're describing, Ian, depends on infinite growth. And when the bottom fell out of the market, a lot of things about that economy fall apart. But there's another more basic level, and Axi did this better than most, but it's just game design 101. Your game has to have compelling syncs.
Right.
And guess what? When one of the options is that you can take that token out of the game, sell it, and buy a sandwich, you now have to make your currency sync that much more compelling because there's this alternative of cash value. And this is one of the reasons that I'm personally quite against tokens as part of the default design. And tying things together, if you also have a VC who's rapidly dumping that token on the market to cash out their initial investment, that puts further downward pressure. So I think there's this stew of reasons why these economies for these games were kind of doomed by design, at least in this first iteration. But it's easy to say in hindsight.
Yeah,
I mean, I think all of us participated in these, but with the clarity of hindsight, I think it's clear to see the factors that really force these economies downward.
Sherif, anything to add here?
Yeah, I mean, coming from the gamer perspective, so I mean, the traditional gaming publications and just the meta on that side was just totally against the idea of, other concepts before NFTs and tokens, but loot boxes, microtransactions, pay to win tactics that were being, forced in Web2 games. And there was just this pushback, and this is kind of its cousin, right? And so just having that initial knee-jerk reaction to it. So you had these ingrained Web2 gamers just against the process. We had just the speculators coming in based on value of a token, and then game design issues. Slowly, you can even see it now in publications where you have this language changing from NFTs to digital collectibles and tokens to just in-game currency. And it'll be a slow shift because that culture was really ingrained. And you could even see it in Dr. Disrespect, well-respected Web2 streamer. He has a, Web3 gaming studio. And anytime he discusses it, it's the comment section just blows up. And so that culture shift will probably need to happen also for this mainstream pull.
Right. There's a lot of reputational damage that has to be overcome now for the technology.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, it's interesting that you laid it out as a comparison to the free-to-play and IP gaming tactics, because if you recall, that was, like you said, people were really, really against it now. And now it's the de facto system for monetization. And so you have to wonder if one of the reasons why I think that is because that actually incrementally increased the pie of what type of games were possible to create and who were gamers, right? So you had a bunch of people who would never buy a $60 box who will play Candy Crush and end up paying $2,000 over the course of their lifetime. And so my assumption is that the Web3 games ecosystem, as it matures, is going to be another incremental ecosystem which drives incremental games and incremental players. And obviously we see people who are interested in financialization here. And I think the trend of betting on sports games or using Robinhood, I mean, there's clearly a pent-up demand for these types of experiences, whether it's crypto or something comparable. So, I mean, I think long-term, there's obviously going to be an increased engagement here as we see these experiences more refined over time. Let's talk about where we are now and then talk about how are we seeing success? What games are seeing success currently in the Web3 game space and why?
Well, as far as games seeing success, we're still kind of at zero. At the scale, at least at the scale Upptic measures. So by Upptic's client portfolio, just for listener context, probably about half of our clients are using Web3 tech in some way, but they're all much earlier stage. If you looked at the downloads of games that Upptic drives, 99% is probably in traditional games. So it's still very early innings, and Axi has not been displaced. It's the largest success case so far. What are you guys' thoughts on the moment we're at today?
Its measure of success is really hard at this point, but I kind of calculate it in terms of what barriers are we starting to break into that is kind of just moving that needle forward. And so you have things like My Pet Hooligan just started a Amazon Prime Gaming marketing deal and is, highlighted by Prime on Twitter. And that's wonderful to see. You have Shrapnel on the Epic Games Store and a game called Bornless that just broke some records on the Steam wishlist for a Web3 game. So you have these things that are very mainstream facing metrics that they are starting to break into. And then hopefully that just continues a domino effect.
Ian, what's your take on the current state of things?
Well, I think for the first time ever, we're talking about Web3 gaming projects that have a playable, decently fun game, right? Like that already represents a monumental shift compared to what we were doing 2 years ago. And with that in mind, we're starting to be able to test, can we run traditional user acquisition tactics to drive users into these games at scale efficiently? And now we have some real world use cases that have proven out that yes, we can do that, both on native PC and especially on mobile. So with that in mind, at least 3 of the 4 of us here are very aligned in the high value proposition of Web3 gaming. And so it's like, okay, for everything we've seen in Web 2 in mobile for the last 10 years, it says you need to be able to feed the machine with new users through tracked user acquisition, and that's how you're going to grow the overall game. So I think, no, we have not yet found the slam dunk that we end up scaling to the level that we have with other Web 2 titles, but it's feeling more real right now, which is definitely a change.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ian. And I think part of what's enabled this that's important to call out about the current moment is in this last year, we've really seen platform acceptance from the mainstream distribution platforms. Like one of our partners is a game called Blocklords, and they're in very early stages of their launch, but it's available on Epic. It's a beautiful looking game, and we're able to see competitive marketing KPIs when we bring it to market, because we're not like blockchain to blockchain. We're just like, here's a fun strategy game that's on Epic where you would normally go to download a fun strategy game. And then once you get down the rabbit hole, you learn about the ability to like own the items in the game and whatnot. But this is pretty new, this era. And similar to what you said, Ian, both Google and Apple have become more clear with their policies. We see more titles accepted there. Another one of our partners, Immutable, is launching a mobile game that we think will do quite well, Guild of Guardians, because it's got that level of polish you'd expect in a mobile free-to-play action RPG. And so it does feel like, even though the market conditions are the worst they've been at least since I got into the space, the actual lanes for adoption, I think, have never been better. It's just kind of like no one cares right now, but we can also kind of use that to our advantage if we're just like, it's just a game, just download and play this really fun game. And yeah, there's this other stuff in it. You can kind of learn about it at your own pace if you want to,
Yeah. Experiment while no one's watching so that you're ready when all eyes are on you. Yeah.
Right.
It's totally viable strategy.
Yeah. And Sherif, you called out Bornless. That's another great example. I think they had like over, you said 100,000.
Yeah, the wish list within a week. Yeah, so they're a smaller team and they're experimenting and they're focused on the Web 2 side. So it's really, like Ian said, it feels more real at this point. You have real products, real teams participating. And as long as the execution continues at this pace, I think we'll see more of those barriers be broken down.
Absolutely. And the term that I'm trying to get stick is what I call the Web 2.5 mullet, which means that you have free to play in the front and blockchain in the back. You don't put the blockchain at the forefront. You just position it as a fun game.
Love
and then learn that down the line. Yeah.
I love mullet.
Ian does love mullets. He's the mullet master. So, I mean, if we go back to the question at the top, is the Web3 game dream dead? What's the verdict? Everyone has to have short take. What's everyone's position on this?
It's humbled.
It's been refined.
In bad ways and good, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's been refined.
Yeah, it's evolved.
So here's another way to put the question. Should we just shut the fuck up about calling Web3? Seriously, is this just like a branding problem? Like, is this just, we need to just be like, is it a branding issue?
I mean, I think I might have spoken about this the last time I was on the Upptic podcast, and apologies if I did, but, the Reddit avatars situation officially confirms that this whole thing is a marketing issue, right? Like on Reddit, users love to hate NFTs and crypto and everything Web3. And then Reddit's like, hey, we're going to have a whole bunch of unique avatars that you can buy and use as your icon on our website. How cool is that? And then all these same people that are ranting about how they would never do crypto, it makes no sense, it's so dumb. Effectively, they've spent money, and then Reddit creates a custodial wallet on their behalf, and that Reddit avatar is an NFT, and they don't even know it as they're ranting about how they would never use an NFT. So I think maybe not 100% of the problem is positioning and marketing, but I think a large percentage of it is, more than half.
Yeah, because I think if you could just describe to an average gamer the feature set that Web3 tech enables for a game and not mention any of this terminology and say, would you rather your game had this feature set or didn't have this feature set? You're building a CCG or an RPG. Would you rather that you own the items of the game and can trade them and can bring them into a new game? Or would you rather that you couldn't? I think it's a pretty easy sell, but no one wants to be associated with that scammy crypto stuff and all the bad examples and the bad reputation that unfortunately the space earned for itself. And now we have to like dig ourselves out of that hole with legitimately good games with novel concepts that aren't first and foremost motivated from speculation.
Agreed.
But we can do that. I'm still, this has been kind of a pessimistic podcast, I think, at large, but overall, I'm as much a believer in the technology as I've ever been, just being a little quiet about it, because of the current appetite for it. But behind the scenes, we're doing more to grow Web3 games on our side than we ever have.
What about you, Sherif? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think the future is bright. I think it's just like the tactics that are being utilized, not only in the development of the game, but the marketing of the game have to be like with pinpoint accuracy, because small pie of players at the moment, and then you need to use separate tactics to reach the larger player base that you want to onboard to the game. So the historical use of the Web3 tactics kind of are, as Ian said, just don't work as well anymore. And so we need to focus on the Web2 traditional gamers and onboard through this change of branding and messaging that you alluded to.
Awesome. Ian, last words?
I have not found the opportunity to sneak this in, so I'll do it right now, which is one of the things I'm most excited about in some of these Web3 projects are create to earn model. Basically, any of these games that allow users to create their own content for it, whether it's a map or an item or something else, and then that becoming a basis for NFTs that can be traded and sold and, get obviously the game some percentage of the sales royalty, and the creators get value too. I think systems like that also encourage users to actually contribute to the overall value of that ecosystem, right? So I think it is a super interesting proposition. You see it in, Shrapnel and Worlds Beyond and other projects. So definitely excited to see how that shakes out. And to answer your direct question, Xander, I'm feeling good about Web3, despite where we've been. Things are feeling better right now. I'm still bullish. Mic drop. I'm out.
Cool. Well, thank you for joining us on this meandering hypothesis and exploration of Web3 gaming and its past, present, and future. Thanks for joining us. Talk soon.